Hello my wonderful, beautiful friends, guys. Welcome back to our /PettyRevenge, where people get small wins on others and the stories are so satisfying. And in today's episode, it's another wild lineup. We've got bad roommates, nightmare gym teachers, seat stealers, and one OP tells a story about the time they shut down a business for 2 days to spite a nasty manager. Also, if you're listening to this episode, it should only be on the DarkFluff channel, nowhere else. So yeah, sit back, relax, and enjoy the ride. Let's dive in. Last week, I took a flight from Athens, where I'd been visiting relatives, to London. It was a late flight, I was exhausted, and the plane was full. I was in a window seat, which I'd chosen, so I could rest my head against the walls and sleep. But when I got to my row, there was a guy in my seat. The guy had big headphones on, and he had his head turned away from me. I tried telling him that he's in my seat, but the guy doesn't respond. Thinking maybe he can't hear me because of the headphones, I gently tap him on the shoulder. There was no reaction, so I try again. Still nothing. And the guy doesn't even turn towards me. I also want to add that clearly the guy's not asleep. He's sitting upright and I can see his eyes are open, so the guy's ignoring me. At this point, I consider calling a flight attendant to ask him to move, but there isn't one nearby, and I'm not in the mood for it to be a whole thing, so I just take the middle seat and quietly fume. A few minutes later, the young woman who's sitting in the aisle seat arrives and takes her seat. She's traveling with her friend, who's sitting in the window seat in the row behind us. They're talking to each other across their seats. Then, the woman sitting in the aisle seat turns to me, and she asks if I can swap with her friend so they can sit together. The perk of me swapping, of course, is I get the window seat. So I say, sure, no problem. Now at this point, it's important to point out that her friend is a much larger woman than I, and I saw a chance at revenge. As I get up to move, I can see the guy sitting in my seat has turned around and he realized what's about to happen. The guy doesn't look happy and he gives me a look like he's saying, please don't move. I just ignore him and I swap seats. I spent the flight mostly with my eyes closed as I try to get a nap in, but I do occasionally have a look at the row in front of me, and I'm very satisfied to see that the woman in front of me is taking up nearly half the window seat as well as her own seat, and that the guy in my seat is squashed up against the wall of the plane. I hope he spent the whole flight thinking how if he'd just taken his own seat, he would have been able to swap with a woman, and I would have been the one pinned against the wall. Maybe next time, he'll think twice before he takes someone else's seat. Now that's instant karma right there, guys. Steal my window seat, be mega uncomfortable for the whole flight. And this person comments that OP should have kicked his seat continuously throughout the whole flight, just to add insult to injury. Some people are way too good at being petty. So this was well over a decade ago, but I wanted to share. I was born with a heart disease and I had surgery as a kid. I'm completely okay, but sports was obviously not my thing. I was small, skinny, and clumsy because I really couldn't do the typical outdoor stuff like most kids. That meant I got teased and picked on and all that. Typical for a geeky kid who doesn't excel with football. That said, in high school, we had a mildly problematic gym teacher. He was a typical sports dude who would make fun of slower kids. I still remember how he ordered my overweight friend to do a gymnastics jump from a trampoline over a stool, which he obviously couldn't do, and my friend fell so hard he cracked his head. I found peace with myself long before, and mostly, I didn't care, I just took it. But it was stupid, and I hated how he encouraged the jock culture of making fun of the nerds. We would occasionally do basketball or soccer or football. The thing about my specific condition is I don't do explosive and reactive sports at all, so I would have to sit down every few minutes to catch my breath. Now, you would think, what's wrong with that? But I was shamed about being the weakling of the class every single week. I do like sports though, a lot. I was just told by my parents and doctors to take it easy. And growing up, I noticed I had no problem whatsoever with endurance and steady long distance efforts. As long as I don't go into the red, I could keep it up for quite a while. So it's not a surprise that I fell in love with road cycling when I first saw the Tour de France on TV. I was super skinny, couldn't sprint, but I could climb a long mountain any day, pacing myself and blowing nearly anyone off my wheel on endurance. So I got myself a road bike and I never told anyone at school about my rides. So here comes the revenge. We had a class called Sports Day, and there was a bus arranged to take us to the top of a mountain about an hour away where we were supposed to go on a hike. Our gym teacher makes an announcement that if anyone wants, he'll cycle up there, and we could join him on the climb instead of the hike. I was the only one to volunteer. He was surprised, and he comments something to the effect of not being able to keep up, and I'm not gonna wait for you. But I insisted. There was no way he could know that I was more than capable to climb that mountain, because he only saw me struggling with sports with him. He also couldn't know that this was my home hill. It literally starts a kilometer away from my house. And I did that climb over 100 times, and I knew it blind, and I knew my pacing, and while I was no super athlete, I knew that I could probably drop my gym teacher at will there. For the cyclists out there, the climb's 12.5 kilometers, 6.9 gradient, super regular. For non-cyclists, it's a perfect climb for a lightweight rider with good pacing and stamina. So the day arrives and I do my warm-up, nutrition, and everything, as if it was a life or death mountaintop time trial. And I rock up at the school in my full racing kit and my racing bike. I was 17 years old, weighed about 55 kilograms, and I was totally prepared. He was a typical, middle-aged, overconfident ex-soccer player, probably weighing 90 kilograms on a standard mountain bike. It was a super perfect situation. He sets a relatively hard pace on the stretch of flat before the climb, and I don't speak or take the front. I just take my good time to get back on his wheel after intersections, and he probably thinks he'll drop me the second we start going uphill. Then the climb begins. It becomes very apparent to me that the guy's near his limit, but also, he's a lot slower than what I could do on that mountain. But I don't attack him, that wouldn't be satisfying. Instead, I start bantering how someone's getting dropped today and it would be super embarrassing if the whole class sees how I beat him. And then, I take over the pacing and slowly start turning the screw on him. I only went a little faster, and then a bit more. I knew after about 3 kilometers that the guy was in the red, so I ease off, keeping him slightly over his limit for the next half an hour. I wanted to make him suffer, but without dropping him. I slow down to let him recover for a tiny bit if he starts looking too tired, but then I would slowly push the speed up to make it as painful to him as possible. I don't think I've ever enjoyed myself on my bike more. We made it near the top together, and for the last 300 meters or so, I speed way past him. It was that typical humiliation attack every amateur group ride cyclist knows. He dropped like a stone. I got my little revenge, and I was very happy with myself. When he made it to the end, excuses poured out. He starts saying something about his bike being too heavy, skipping breakfast that morning, so on and so forth. I just kept my mouth shut. But it gets better. On the top, he was clearly dead, so much so that he had to vomit in the parking lot. And even though only a few classmates saw it, everyone knew. He had to sit out the hike after, and I just quietly sat there with him, because I didn't need to do the hike like he promised. I just looked at him, enjoying the sweet revenge. I didn't say anything after that, nor did he, and he never made any comments to me in gym class again. So the lesson is, don't pick on your students, they might surprise you. Guys, I love this petty revenge so much because there's nothing like embarrassing a teacher who spent weeks upon weeks doing the same to you. I'm just glad the guy learned his lesson, and hopefully he remembers that for future students who don't excel to his standards. And this person shares a similar experience. They say, I had a similar experience in gym class. My teacher wasn't a bully, but I was frequently criticized for not giving 100%. Ignoring the fact that my 100% was the average kid's 60%. One day, the teacher takes us down to the school track for fitness walking. The thing is, not only was I over 6 feet tall in the 11th grade, but I'd also been walking to and from school since I was 9 years old, about 2 miles away, giving me an incredible walking stride. So we start off, and I immediately start outpacing everyone. All of the student athletes couldn't believe that walking was the one thing I was better than them at, and a lot of them were tiring themselves out trying to keep up with me. A girl who was the captain of the volleyball team was the most vocal about it. She said something like, I'm double timing his pace and he's still halfway around the track from me. I got so far ahead of them that I managed to loop around and overtake them, to which the volleyball captain couldn't believe. She said, he looped me? Are you kidding me? That's when the gym teacher told me that I would get a better workout if I reduced my stride, but I wasn't having any of it. So here's some background. About 10 plus years ago, I went through a pretty lengthy divorce, and that's another story in itself. Unfortunately, with many breakups, our friends picked a side. We didn't make any ultimatums, at least I didn't, but our friend group was definitely divided. I would say that my ex got most of them because the majority were his friends when I met him, so that makes sense. This meant I was no longer invited to dinners or plans, and the calls and text messages gradually disappeared. Some even unfollowed me on social media, but again, I do get it. I began to move on with my life and I made new friends. There were a couple of exceptions, mainly the wives who I stayed friendly with, but nowhere near BFFs. Anyway, one day before finalizing the divorce, I'm at an event that my now ex invited me to. He had even reserved a VIP ticket and experience for me. I'm in the VIP room collecting my credentials and I bump into one of his friends. I just said hi and the guy literally stares at me and he walks around me like I don't exist. And I want to note, this is someone who I took care of their animals when they went out of town. We had game nights together, had drinks together, but clearly he chose a side in all of this, and he decided he wanted nothing to do with me. So I thought, cool, message received. A couple of years pass and I'm remarried and I'm doing pretty good professionally. Out of the blue, I get an email to my work email from that guy. It starts with something like, it's been a long time since we've connected, I hope all is well. And then it goes into, by the way, I just applied for a job at your firm and I put you down as a referral, so put in a good word for me. I just sat there rereading thinking, what the actual F? I did the obligatory LinkedIn visit and I saw he'd been hunting for a job for a while. I sat on it for a bit and initially, I decided to not reply or do anything. But the more I thought about it, I really didn't want to work with that guy and I was kind of pissed that he tried to use my name and title to get an in. So I called HR and I told them there's no way I would refer this guy. I also told my boss about that guy and we had a good chuckle about the actual nerve of him. Obviously, he never made it to the interview process. And this is why you should never burn bridges or be mean to people, guys. You never know when you'll come across them in the future. That said, gotta love his approach though, right? Hey person I pretended didn't exist and proceeded to ghost for years. I would love it if you could tell your boss how awesome I am for no reason at all so I can get this job. Oh, and by the way, I'm not offering anything in return, not even an apology. I only wish OP responded to that email with, oh, I'm sorry, who are you? So this happened back when I was in college full-time and working full-time, so I had little time to meal prep. I would make enough meals for a few days and then store them on my designated shelf in our shared dorm fridge. I would come home from a very long day and I would just want to eat and relax, but I would always have no food left. 9 times out of 10, I would actually walk into them eating my meals. They would even have the guts to say how good it tasted, and they're sad I didn't make more. I would ask them over and over again to stop eating my food, but no, they wouldn't listen. One day, I went home to my parents' house and I make a lot of spaghetti, good spaghetti, knowing that they would most certainly eat the whole thing. Sure enough, I get home to my dorm after a long day, and these 3 girls who weren't even my roommates are standing in the kitchen eating my spaghetti, and the huge bowl is almost gone. The one girl says how much she loves it and she wants to know how I made it. And here's my petty revenge. With a straight face, I tell her that it's a common meal we make on the farm. We go to the butcher and we get head cheese, and that's the meat that's in the spaghetti. She was confused as they're total city kids, and they didn't know what head cheese was. And this is when I answer, oh, well, head cheese is what we call pig brains. It's really good, isn't it? That's what most of my meals are made from. Hearing me say that, she throws my bowl of spaghetti down and she runs to the bathroom. I can hear her forcing herself to spew up everything in her stomach, and the others took off out of the dorm running too. This is how I ended them stealing my food with such petty revenge. Nobody touched my food ever again, nor did they talk to me, which is a win-win. Also, the meat wasn't head cheese and brains. It was pork sausage and very lean beef mixed together to resemble cooked pig brains. Also, I truly wish this wasn't true. I would have been a lot happier and ate better. These girls were the true definition of 0 F's given. No morals, nothing. A-holes is what they were. Yeah, that is definitely one way to get someone to stop eating your food. Make it sound absolutely disgusting. And the nerve of some people, right? Like, I get 1 or 2 times, but this occurred on a weekly basis where they would steal OP's food. I'm surprised it took that long for OP to dish out some petty revenge. And this person comments, it reminds me of the time I threw a potluck dinner. This one girl came, and of course, she didn't bring anything again. After she remarked on how good the meatballs were, the one who made them was proud to say they were made of lamb. The rude one makes a face, and she asked why no one told her it wasn't beef. That's when I said to her, no big deal, just eat what you brought. Oh, yeah, that's right, you didn't bring anything. She was also proud to say she didn't eat pork, but oh how she loved bacon. And guys, while we're on the topic of getting back at roommates, listen to this post, where OP deals with a loud snoring roommate. So I work and live on a cruise ship, and depending on the route, we dock every 2 to 4 days. I have 1 roommate and we have bunk beds with me on top. I'm a performer, so we get to pick our roommates, and my roommate never told me that she snored very loudly. I did try earplugs, but no. I also have big over-the-ear headphones and was playing music, but still I could hear her. It's loud. Her snoring is not only loud, but it's concerning because she chokes in her sleep too. The first time I heard it, I almost fell out of my bunk bed to rush down and check on her, thinking she was having some kind of medical emergency. I did talk to her to see if we could come up with a solution, and she basically shoots me down because she thought since she was sleeping fine, it wasn't a big deal. Also, it's really hard to change roommates unless something major happens, and snoring isn't considered one of those, despite me voicing my lack of sleep. I did my best to live with it, but I was fed up when I got done with a long workday and I had to be up at 6 a.m. and the snoring only allowed me 2 hours of sleep. So that's when I decided to be petty and I decided to record her. The next day, when I was going to the room for a break, she was there and she said she was gonna take a nap. I was like, okay, and as she laid down, I start playing her snoring. She immediately shot up and she looked at me like I was insane. When all I did was stare at her, she asked me to turn it off. I just said to her, well, this is you snoring, and you said it's not a big deal, so why should I? She gets really mad, and she says a few choice words and leaves the room. For about 3 days, whenever she tried to rest, I played her own snoring back at her. Finally, I got called in for a meeting with the manager because roommate was mad at me. I explained my side of the story, and because roommate failed to mention that she refused to address her snoring, she made it seem like I was playing loud noises for the heck of it. In the end, my roommate's angry that the manager didn't fully take her side, and even told her she was being difficult by not trying to address her snoring and brushing off my need for sleep. We end up getting moved with new roommates though. So before we begin, this is not in America, so US labor laws don't apply here. This was a small team of 10 people that the manager was assigned to, myself included. I was the last person to be hired on the team, so everyone was basically my superior. On the first day I worked there, they call a team meeting after work. We log off our computers at 4:55 p.m. We go to the meeting room and we clocked out at 5:15 p.m. Every day like clockwork. I just thought, no problem, that's an extra 2.5 hours on the bi-weekly paycheck. And we don't have to do any actual work except listen. But when my first payday came, I saw my full 80 hours. But the extra 2.5 hours were nowhere to be found. So I asked a couple of guys if they only got paid 80 hours too. They all confirmed it. They said, we don't get paid for these meetings. The shift ends, and once again, the manager calls for a daily team meeting and to log off at 4:55 p.m. and then head to the meeting room. I do so, and I sit there for 5 minutes. As soon as it hits 5 p.m., I get up and say, I need to be somewhere important. And with everyone's eyes on me, the manager says, okay. I leave the room, clock out, and go home. The next day, I do the same, and again and again. The manager never stops me, and then one day, the manager pulls me to the side and asked, hey, what's this important thing you need to get to after work every day? I just tell him it's a personal matter, and he leaves it at that. Pretty soon, it catches on. The other guys start leaving right after me, and eventually, within a matter of days of me starting to leave at 5, everyone else starts doing it too. The manager then starts scheduling meetings for 4:40 p.m. All it took was one person to not take this crap anymore. And with OP being the new worker there, kudos to them for not putting up with that. Like sometimes the workers gotta train the managers, right? And this person says, I once had a job that needed overtime. I've never been a fan of overtime whatsoever. I put a very high value on my personal free time. I got sick of it and I decided I would no longer participate. So every day at 5:30, I start clocking out. The boss pulls me to the side one day and he asked why I'm leaving early. I respond, I have other things to do after work, and he wanted to know what those things were. I told him it's really none of your business, but it's called not being at work. I don't want or need overtime. So I live in a college dorm on an all-female floor. I usually only wear a bra if I leave the dorm building, but I'm not gonna put on a bra under my shirt just to walk down the hall to the bathroom. A few days ago, just before bed, I left my room and I walked 10 yards down the hall to the water fountain. I refilled my water bottle and then went back to my room. I was wearing a white tank top and no bra. The tank top was fitted, but wasn't see-through. There was a small group of people hanging out in the hall, but I thought nothing of it, until around half an hour later when I get a knock on the door from one of the girls I'd seen in the hall. She said something to the effect of, hey, so sorry to ask you this, but if you go out into the hall, could you please put a bra on? My boyfriend's out there and he was staring a little, so... Now, I'm super non-confrontational, so I was like, yeah, sure, sorry about that. And for the rest of the night, anytime I left my room, I put a sweater on. And that was the end of it, or so I thought. The next day, my roommate told me that she'd overheard the girl telling a few of her friends about the incident while in the bathroom. She said the girl was making it sound like I'd been purposely trying to seduce her boyfriend, wearing basically nothing, and taking my time at the water fountain. Not only that, but I was apparently posing to push out my chest, the whole works. When she left the bathroom, my roommate said the girl was actually acting it out at the water fountain, pretending to be me, mocking me. That night, I passed the girl and some of her friends on the way to go brush my teeth. And I want to note, I wasn't wearing a bra, I was already in pajamas. The girl looked down at my chest and all of them start giggling. But the last straw was when the entire dorm gets an email from the RA yesterday, saying that they'd got some anonymous complaints about people dressing inappropriately in the hallways, and asking that we just make sure everything gets covered up. So here's where I get my little petty revenge. I knew that the girl's boyfriend doesn't go to college here. The girl and I were in the same orientation group and we chatted a bit back then. I also knew we aren't allowed to have non-student/family guests in the dorms after certain hours. So I used the same anonymous complaint form to issue a complaint about people bringing in their off-campus boyfriends into our dorm after certain hours. This morning, the RA emails again saying that due to anonymous complaints, they would be enforcing the no off-campus guest rule after hours by checking IDs of unfamiliar guests to make sure they were students from then on. And really, this girl should be thanking me. If she was concerned about her boyfriend seeing the vague outline of my chest in the dorm hallways, she no longer needs to worry. When I was 15 years old, I worked at a very popular pizza place in Canada that rhymes with nut. It was run and managed by a couple of snobby college kids that thought they were big stuff running a pizza joint. Congratulations! I was in between work and I didn't want to work a fast food place, but my first choice at the local arena fell through because I had to be 16 to work with certain chemicals. So I bit the bullet and applied. I got the job and I was hired for working in the kitchen. Within a month, they wanted me to learn how to make dough. I wasn't for it because that meant I had to come in every weekend at 6 a.m. to have dough ready for when they opened at noon. I said, fine, I would learn, but I don't want to do it every weekend. I was a kid. I enjoyed my weekend time and I was much happier working weeknights. They assured me I would only have to work one weekend dough shift a month. I said, okay, great. They got my partner in crime, who we'll call Scott, to agree to the same thing, and we both learned and nailed it. Within 2 weeks of learning, Scott and I were back-to-back weekend shifts. We worked every Saturday and Sunday going forward. When I went to my boss and told her, she laughed. She said, too bad, you want a job, so you have to work whatever shifts we give you. They all thought it was hilarious, the group of them. We were the joke of the pizza joint. They knew we needed jobs and that we wouldn't quit. Then, I went home one Saturday and my parents said the arena called and they wanted me to come in for another interview. I went in and I was told I would be offered the job in 2 weeks, the day after my birthday. I asked if they needed anyone else and they said yes, and I told them about my friend Scott and how he worked. He said to hand in his resume and he would get it all set up. Cue petty revenge. The next Saturday, I went into work and I sat around and did absolutely nothing. I just drank chocolate milk and I hung out in the booths of the restaurant twirling my thumbs. My boss shows up for open and I was standing there, apron and name tag in hand. I said to her, I quit. My boss just laughs and she says, whatever, we were going to fire you anyways. She then commented that if it were her, she wouldn't have shown up at all and she would have screwed over the place with not making any dough. That's when I laugh and I say, oh, but I didn't make any dough. I just hung out all morning and made no dough, so you still need to pay me for my shift. The look on her face was gold. She ends up having to close the store for a full day because they had no dough made. And then, to top it off, Scott repeats my quitting method the following day, and they had to close again. We worked together at the arena for the rest of high school and told that story fondly. And to clear things up, the process of making dough, or at least when I worked there, was a non-stop grind. You would mix dough, portion out the dough, put in speed proofer for an hour, then cold storage, and repeat non-stop for 6 hours. On occasion, you could use day-old dough in a pinch, but it didn't hold up and the pizza typically came out very flat. That being said, the boss there always kept the staff as thin as possible and would not have been able to run the front of house and back of house at the same time to have made dough on the spot. We were a small town and we were the busiest pizza place there. Friday evenings and Saturday and Sunday with the cheap buffet were crazy. Thanks for the love and glad people enjoy the story. What a well done petty revenge that was, and with Scott repeating what Opie did the day after, absolutely perfect. Like having the store closed for 2 days in a row on the weekend is a huge loss of profits, especially for a pizza place. And I'm sure the owner kept that in mind when Opie's Karen boss came to them for a raise. And that, my friends, brings us to another end of r/petty revenge. Guys, I hope you enjoyed today's stories. If you did, hit that thumbs up. And if you're not subscribed, consider subscribing so you don't miss these crazy stories. And if you missed the last episode on the channel, it's an r/malicious compliance episode where OP's smug boss gets taught a lesson she won't ever forget. Go check it out if you haven't, and myself and Stevie Boy will see you guys in the next one. We love you.